2 years, Dagestan, and forget this weekend I have a one-way ticket planned to fly directly to Dagestan, where I am going to be spending a couple of years wrestling and getting ready to make my run in the world of MMA in the heavyweight division, backed by City Kickboxing and Dan Hooker's 1-minute fights. If you know, you know. However, that isn't happening, of course, but I did shave my head. I do, I guess, kind of look like I'm from Dagestan at the moment, I don't know. And secondly, I actually am going overseas this weekend, so I'm going to be going to Tonga with my family, and so that means for you guys, I'm going to be recording UFC and PFL predictions within the next couple of days. That means that you are going to be getting predictions very, very early for those two cards coming up next week. LFA 211, Mesquita versus Dinwoodie. We did swerve away from that in the intro. That is what this video is about. I'm breaking down the main card for this one here, and I'm going to try and make it relatively quick because I am only doing the main card, and I think it's going to be a good one. It's going to be on UFC Fight Pass, broadcast this Friday at 9 PM Eastern Time. I do, of course, have an article as well on this card on the We Want Picks website. If you do sign up to We Want Picks and you use the code ARTEM, you will get 10% off your first membership. Let's go to the first fight that I want to talk about. Jacoby Jones versus Shavkal Chuchev. This is honestly a very fun fight. Like, I'm really looking forward to it. It's between two guys that are primary strikers. I think you could argue that Jones is probably going to shoot takedowns in this matchup, but we're not going to know until these guys are both in the cage, really. But the thing about Jones is he was on the Contender Series in 2023, and in my opinion, I made one of my best Contender Series predictions maybe ever, with a plus 230 underdog prediction picking against Jacoby Jones. Now, at the time, I personally felt like Jacoby Jones was very overrated, and I was very impressed by Daniel James Allen's wrestling at the time, and we had just kind of seen Jacoby Jones sort of struggle with a couple of guys that were trying to take him down, which is why I did pick Allen in that fight. However, he actually lost to Allen in the striking, which was very surprising to me. And it is a little bit of a recurring theme in Jacoby Jones' career. He fights against guys that are much taller than him at 155. I don't know why his manager has done this or how his managers managed to do this, but, you know, Daniel James Allen was 6 foot tall, Keegan Genrich is like 6'2" or something crazy like that, and Shavkal Chuchev is 6'1" and is another rangy striker that Jacoby Jones now has to fight against. So stylistically, this is actually a very bad matchup for Jacoby Jones. Jones is a very solid boxer. He has a lot of power. He's got some fun highlights. I quite like watching him fight, and he does have pretty decent wrestling. The thing about Jones, though, is he doesn't really wrestle all that much, and in my opinion, in this matchup, he should, because Shavkal Chuchev is a very interesting character in the world of MMA. The more research I did on him, the more confused I got. Of course, I did break down his fight against Inkir Bayasuk, and I thought that fight was going to be a lot more of a banger than it was, and it kind of didn't really end up being all that. But in that fight, he did look pretty solid. He maintained range incredibly well against a much shorter opponent, and he did throw like a lot of fun strikes. Like, he was throwing flying knees, he was throwing spinning like kicks, and he was just kind of doing literally anything except the basic stuff, I guess you could say. He does have a bit of an odd background in this here. This is just boxing in a cage, and he's also got Nashi Dello fights as well behind his belt, I guess you would call it. I don't know, but anyway, Chuchev, 1.7 million followers on Instagram. Not too sure how he pulled it off, but maybe his social media guy needs to contact me, because I'm on my way to 10,000 subscribers, and I would really like to reach that. Maybe Chuchev knows a thing or two about guys that can pull strings. I don't know, but 1.7 million followers on Instagram. Not too sure how he did it. Seems to have like a very odd sort of MMA background as well. Apparently, he's like notorious in the Russian regional scene. Like, I don't really know what's going on with that, but Jacoby Jones, he is the pick. I do think if Jones lost to Chuchev, it would be a step down in competition for him. I think it would be a big fall from grace. And I do think that if Jones can beat Chuchev, I wouldn't expect to see him on the Contender Series this year, but I honestly do think that if Jones beats Chuchev and then can maybe get a couple more wins, I think then you could probably expect to see him on the Contender Series next year again, because he just wasn't quite ready when he did fight in 2023. I'm picking Jones. I'm picking Jones to win by knockout or decision in this fight. Jones is a favorite. Jones is actually minus 226. Personally, don't recommend betting on the fight. Now we have Adam Livingston fighting against Hugo Ozan. This seems to be a bit of a striker versus wrestler matchup. Livingston is a 6'2" guy at 155 pounds. He doesn't really have like a big 6'2" build. He's kind of got the Sam Patterson build where he's very tall, very lanky, very thin for 155, which is probably how he makes the weight class. I guess you could almost say the Tom Nolan build, right? But Livingston, very tall for the weight class, going to have a pretty clear size advantage over Ozan here, and he is a bit of a striker. Now, I do worry about him in this fight because Ozan is a wrestler. He's got a couple of losses recently, and he seems to just kind of struggle against anyone that kind of has any skills because all of his wins are just not against good opponents, I will be honest. But the way that he beats all of these guys is he just goes there and he gets the takedown, and he controls them, he goes for side control, he looks for his ground and pound, and he just wants to control you for 15 minutes, really. Now, the thing is that we just saw him get dominated in the wrestling by Richie Miranda, but Miranda's pretty good. And in that fight there, I mean, he just couldn't really get the takedowns off. And if he can't get the takedowns off, I think he gets knocked out. Ozan is just like, he's a bad striker. I'm just going to say it how it is. He's a bad striker. He stands very upright, like he's almost leaning back with his hands like this when he's striking. It's just a very, very odd sort of look, and he just doesn't look comfortable on the feet. Livingston, I do think that he's also a little bit flawed. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about him as a prospect as of right now, because he does look pretty awkward. He doesn't really have fantastic technique, but he does have good power to back it up. It is worth noting in this fight here against Jake Hixenbar, Hixenbar was also 6'2", was actually bigger than Livingston, was a very, very big guy for 155. And Hixenbar was able to take down Livingston early. Livingston was able to get back up and then show better takedown defense. And then he caught Hixenbar as he was diving for a takedown, which is how he knocked him out in round 1. I'm picking Livingston to defend some takedowns and knock out Ozan in this fight here. I think it's a very similar stylistic matchup to the fight that he just won against Hixenbar. And Livingston's minus 300. Not super, super confident in Livingston, but I do believe he gets it done in this fight. And this next fight is Lucas Sebert taking on Gustavo Krueger. I do apologize if I said Lucas's surname incorrectly. However, I'm very confused by this fight. Does Gustavo Krueger actually have a proper MMA background? You might see that he's 4-0, looks pretty legit. Then you go to his Tapology page, and he hasn't fought since 2018. And then before that, he hadn't fought since 2015. And then before that, he hadn't fought since 2013. So this guy has not stepped in a cage in 7 years. And these guys that he all beat don't have Tapology pages. So did these fights even happen? Is this a real person? I have no idea. And the thing about Sebert is he's been spending his entire career fighting for this promotion 917 Fight Championships, I believe they're called. 947 FC. But all of these fights, if you go to their website, they're actually kind of hidden behind a paywall. You've got to pay for a live stream to get to them, so I couldn't watch them. I will be honest, however, he does have this win by triangle here against Lucas Bird, who seems to be a pretty good wrestler, like an NCAA champion, I believe is what I saw a lot of people saying he was when he won the fight, which was pretty cool. But just genuinely, guys, I don't really know what Sebert really does. I didn't see tape on either of these guys. Krueger might not exist. He might not be a real person. And Sebert, just, you know, it's all kind of stuck behind a paywall. I do pay for stuff when I have to, but it's when I'm breaking down the Contender Series. And Sebert, I'm just going to pick him to win by submission here because he seems to have a grappling background. If you go to his Instagram page as well, he's like strictly training BJJ and wrestling, so not too sure how the striking looks, but this is going to be a good opportunity for us to see what Sebert is kind of made of against a guy that does have a 4-0 record, even if it does look a little bit concerning in moments. Give me Sebert to win by submission. And now we're going to have another submission here because Giga Kenuto, I believe, is going to submit Fior Hernandez, and I think she's going to do it somewhat easily. Giga Kenuto is the real deal, in my opinion. She's 22 years old. So am I. So Giga Kenuto, hit me up on Instagram or something like that. But in all seriousness, she is very, very good at grappling, and she does have a loss to Natasha Kuziatina, but I honestly don't think that that's a bad loss really at all. I know Kuziatina is pretty old for MMA, but I do think that, you know, just given the matchup, that Kuziatina just has a fantastic background in judo, is a great grappler herself. Kenuto was able to put Kuziatina in a lot of submission attempts in that fight. And then she just backed it up with a fantastic performance here. She got the takedown pretty early and then stood up and just mounted her opponent and just, like, pretty much knocked her out with ground and pound. I mean, you don't really see that all that much at 115 pounds. And Hernandez here is a former women's atomweight, and she did fight for Invicta FC. I did watch a couple of her fights. This fight here went somewhat viral because in the third round, her opponent like kicked her in between the legs like very, very hard, and it went viral. So that was kind of interesting. Had like 60,000 views or something. But I will say about Invicta FC, Megan Anderson, man, like her commentary is just so hard to watch. But with that being said, Hernandez, I did see her fight, and she did give up her back relatively often. In fact, this is how Fiera beat her, was by taking her back. So if you're giving up your back to, in my opinion, a much worse grappler than Kenuto, you're going to get submitted by Kenuto. I'm going to pick Kenuto to win by submission in round number 1 in this matchup. And now we've got the co-main event. Fumi and Couta is back. I am a fan of Fumi and Couta, however, I will admit, I do still get a little bit disappointed in some of his performances because I do think that he's going to need to get finishes if he's going to get that UFC opportunity. He does fight Cody Davis here in the co-main event, and what I think is a little bit of a mirror matchup. Both guys, I think, are pretty small for flyweight, and I know that in Couta, I just said that he's small for the weight class. He did miss weight in his last fight, which isn't really the best look. But the thing about Fumi and Couta is, I genuinely believe that Couta has been deserving of an opportunity to get into the UFC since he was 5-0. I think when I had my channel like 3 years ago, and I was talking about people I wanted to see on the Contender Series in 2022, Fumi and Couta was one of those people, and he's still not in the UFC yet, but he is 9-0, and he is beating a couple of pretty decent guys so far. The problem with Couta is it has been, I mean, at least it's been talked about that apparently the UFC matchmakers are not a fan of his game. And the reason for that, I believe, is just going to be his fighting style. And Couta is a very good wrestler. In fact, he actually took some time away from wrestling, so from MMA, to pursue professional wrestling. And now he's come back to MMA and he's got a few good wins. But if you do watch his fights, he just isn't really that aggressive. He does play his fights very safe. Like, he wins his fights by stalling up against the cage, by getting takedowns, by getting control, and he just doesn't really put himself in any danger to chase a finish. And in my opinion, given the fact that apparently the UFC matchmakers aren't that big of a fan of him, if he's going to, you know, get a contract, I think he needs to do one of two things to be undeniable. He needs to either get a finish, or he just needs to somehow, like, stat pad his way to a 12-0 record, I think. You know, like, if he just beats Cody Davis and he somehow manages to beat a couple of other guys, he's a 12-0 prospect from the United States. I feel like at that point, the UFC would have to sign him, right? And add him to an already very, very good UFC flyweight division. All that talk about Fumi and Couta, no talk about Cody Davis. Cody Davis is a 5'3" flyweight. He is quite small for the weight class, and I think Couta is going to have a very rare size advantage in this fight between the two guys. And the thing about Cody is, I did say that he's got a very similar matchup to Couta. He's also a wrestler, but he does box quite a lot. I just don't love his striking personally. I think that he definitely does his best work when he does get the takedown, when he does get the control. But the difference is between him and Couta is when he gets the control, he's really looking to get a lot of ground and pound off. And I do think that's kind of what makes his fight a little bit more exciting. However, I do think that Cody Davis is coming off a couple of performances. He did have a very good win against Luis Rodriguez, of course. However, before that, though, I do think he's just not really coming off the best performances. And this one here against Eduardo Henrique, he was getting taken down. He was getting hurt pretty early in the fight as well. Just kind of was a bad look for him. I do think that Fumi and Couta can outmuscle Davis here. And I'm going to be honest, I'm picking Fumi and Couta to win this fight by stalling against the clinch for 15 minutes. I'm not expecting it to be the most exciting fight in the world, but if somehow Fumi and Couta is watching this video, genuinely, I do root for him. I do like him a lot. He's pretty funny on Twitter as well. I think I recommend following him on Twitter, but just at this point, man, I just feel like he needs to kind of be a little bit more active and try and, you know, make his way to that 12-0 record. I think at that point, he'll be undeniable. There'll be no denying him at all. But I'm picking Couta, I'm picking him to win by decision, and I do wish him the best. Now we've got Beatrice Mesquita fighting against Sierra Dinwoodie. If you're a knowledgeable person of the grappling and BJJ world, you definitely know who Bia Mesquita is, because she is a 10-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. Apparently, she holds the most wins in black belt history under the IBJJF as well. And if you look at her Wikipedia page, it is just absolutely donned with gold medals from the Pan American Championships, from the World Championships, from the Brazilian National Championships. You name it, Mesquita's won it, and she's probably won it 5 times. Very, very impressive BJJ background for Mesquita, and she has managed to look pretty good, I would say, in MMA so far. Now, I will admit, some performances have been a lot better than others. She did win her most recent fight by disqualification, but that was kind of like an iffy situation. Like, she literally got a heel in her eye, so I can kind of understand that she wouldn't want to fight. Like, it would have hurt, and it would have been very uncomfortable. So, a little bit unfortunate for Hope Chase there, I will admit, but in that fight, her striking didn't look very good, man. It just didn't. You know, like, Hope Chase caught her very early in the fight. There were a lot of striking exchanges in round 1 where Mesquita was just kind of just standing there getting ready to get hit, and she was fighting a better striker. I think she could have been caught and honestly hurt pretty badly on the feet. The thing about Mesquita, though, is I actually think her wrestling is pretty good. Now, she hasn't really fought the best opponents, but she got Hope Chase down very easily when she attempted the takedown in round 1. And then at the start of round 2, she got the takedown again and was working before she got illegally kicked. And once she does get the takedown, she works for submissions very well. She does have some submission wins over not the best competition, I know, but, you know, she's a very good grappler. The thing is, though, she's taken on Sierra Dinwoodie, who is 5'11" at 135 pounds, and she is very big for this weight class. The thing is, I think that Dinwoodie actually does have a lot of potential for women's 135 pound, just given the size of her. She is a genuine 5'11" fighter, and she is so much taller and bigger than every single one of her opponents that she does fight against. The problem is about her, just in my opinion, is she does look pretty awkward. It doesn't really seem like she's super fast. I think that she kind of is so big for 135 that she just can't really be like super athletic and super fast on the feet. The thing is, though, she did drop her opponent Nicole Aguirre in her most recent matchup with a spinning back, what would you call it? A spinning hammer fist, I guess you would call it, because she hit her with this part of her hand. And Nicole Aguirre got dropped in round number 1 by Dinwoodie, and then after that, Dinwoodie just kind of out-grappled her for a very large proportion of the fight. The problem, though, is that Dinwoodie, I think, gave up opportunities to finish the fight in that one there, and I also think that she gave up opportunities to get good positions. And also, I have seen Dinwoodie give up her back in prior fights as well, which I just don't really like seeing when you're taking on what seems to be arguably one of the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners of all time, you know, and Bea Mesquita. So, for that reason, I am picking Mesquita to win by submission. I genuinely do believe, though, you could maybe make an argument for the plus 275 underdog in Dinwoodie here. But I am still going to be going with Mesquita. And to talk about the odds about the last fight, Kenuto's minus 260, Kenuto's minus 2,500. So yeah. Anyway, picking all favorites, but I do think that if there was going to be like a super live underdog for pretty good odds, I think that you would probably be able to make the argument for Dinwoodie to maybe catch Mesquita on the feet. But I think if Mesquita wins this fight, she's either a shoo-in for Dana White's Contender Series, or she's a shoo-in to the UFC because she is 34 years old. If she's going to make things happen, I think it needs to be now. But I think Mesquita could like potentially be the next kind of, I guess you could say, like Mackenzie Dern type grappling prospect that the UFC is going to try and get behind, or even like on like a much smaller scale, like maybe Talita Alamkar, who also has a great BJJ background. But with that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.